Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time, Masechet Zevachim. Today is our 14th class, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 94 through 101. So we have a lot of things to do tonight. We're actually going to begin with the Mishnah at the bottom of Daf 93. So the Mishnah says, if blood from the chatat, from the sin offering, sprinkled on the hide of an animal, and that hide is still attached to the animal, then you do not need to wash the hide. But if it's off the animal, then it does need to be washed. Or it still doesn't need to be laundered or washed because it's not a useful item yet, meaning it's not leather, and it hasn't been made into a kli, into some sort of useful vessel, and therefore you do not need to wash it. Or only the only the parts that the blood got on needs to be washed, and only the things that can be washed need to be washed, meaning if it's something that is washable, so then you wash it, and you have to wash it in a sanctified place, and you wash vessels as well in a sanctified place, and the blood is only of a chatat, a sin offering, not from the other sacrifices. So now the Gemara explains that the Torah says a beged. Beged literally means clothing. So it means that if blood fell on your clothing, so then you have to wash it. But beged also includes hides, right? Because you can make it out of leather. Okay, then the Gemara says, right, include hides that are skinned because they're like a beged, they're on their way to be clothing, because they can become impure. Or maybe beged, the word beged is coming to include sackcloth and other fabrics that you make, that you make garments out of. So now Daf 94 says that again, it seems to be correlated to the item or the cloth becoming impure. So now the Gemara says, how, right, different types of cloth are different sizes in order to, the minimum size, in order to become impure. So if it's a small cloth, or a regular cloth, it's 3 by 3 fingers. And that is enough to be like a patch. So then it is seen as something that can become, it becomes significant, and therefore it could become impure. Or again, maybe the difference is that it depends on the type of leather, meaning leather, a hide is usually trimmed, and therefore if it's untrimmed, it's not going to become impure, and therefore you don't have to wash it if blood gets on it. Okay, so we said it needs to be something that's fitting to be washed. This is coming to exclude wooden vessels, because they are actually like scraped, not washed, and therefore those would not be included. Also, there's a machloket if leather can be washed, right? Meaning, again, if it's something that is usually washed, then you need to, and if not, then no. And then the Gemara discusses different rabbis' who wash their leather shoes, and then they talk about, can you do this on Shabbat? Because really it's not washing, it's just maybe, patching up or, wiping something off. That's not really like laundering. Or maybe the machloket is two different types of leather, a soft leather versus a hard leather. The Gemara says there's two stages to this washing. There's washing, and then there's like rubbing it together or scrubbing. This needs to be done in the temple courtyard. There's a verse that teaches where it needs to be done. The verse also teaches that if you have an earthenware vessel, it needs to be broken. I think I mentioned this last week, but basically the earthenware vessels were seen as disposable, because you would just break them, you crush them up, and you start again. As opposed to a copper vessel needs to be scrubbed or washed. Okay, and this seems to be a stringency for the sin offering. Because as we said, only its blood needs to be washed. Okay, now the next Mishnah tells us that a beged, again, clothing that had blood splashed on it, and then you left the courtyard, you have to bring it back inside the courtyard and then wash it there. Now, what happens if it becomes impure when you left? So then you tear it a little bit, so it's no longer seen as a garment. It loses its impurity, because as long as it's not a garment, it's not impure anymore. Then you bring it back into the courtyard and you wash it. Similarly, with an earthenware vessel, if it was taken out, you have to bring it back in to break it. If it became impure outside, you make a hole in it, and then it's not seen as a vessel. Then you bring it in and then you break it. A copper vessel that went out with blood, you have to bring it in to wash it. If it became impure, you make a large hole in it, and then you bring it in and you wash it. Okay, so now the Gemara explains. If you're gonna, so the Gemara asks, if you're gonna rip the garment outside and bring it in, it's no longer a beged. Why do you need to wash it now? Because it's not a beged anymore. So the Gemara says, no, you leave part of it connected, so it's not impure anymore, but it is still seen as a beged. Daf 95. Tells us the same thing with the earthenware vessel, the kli cheres. You make a hole in it, but it loses its impurity, but it can still hold olives, and therefore it's still seen as a vessel. The same thing with a copper vessel. You make a hole in it, but because you can hammer it back, it's still seen as a vessel. The me'il, the coat of, well, it's not really a coat, but the upper or outer garment of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest, if it becomes impure, you're not allowed to rip it. Therefore, you put in the part, you put in the part with the blood, again, if it's 3 by 3, so then it would not, it's not a beged anymore. And then the Gemara says, well, actually, this me'il, this garment was very thick, and therefore only 3 by 3 tfachim, right, which is, kind of this big, which is much bigger than 3 by 3 fingers. And then the Gemara says, no, even though the me'il is thick, it's seen as very important. It's chashuv, and therefore we go by 3 by 3 fingers. And then the Gemara tells us that you have to clean it with 7 different types of detergents. So for those of you who thought that they didn't know how to wash things in those days, they really did. There are a lot of different substances that they used, but interestingly enough, one of them is urine. And the Gemara says, wait a minute, how could it be? Because we know you're not allowed to bring urine into the Beit HaMikdash, into the temple. So the Gemara says it's okay because it's blended with saliva, and therefore it is okay. It's not regular urine. Okay, next Mishnah. We said, we talked about different vessels. So now the Mishnah is going to explain if you have pots, if you cooked the sacrificial meat in these pots, or you placed the cooked meat into these pots while they were hot. So then they need to be washed. And here, sorry. Beforehand, we were talking about blood in vessels. Now we're going to talk about meat, sacrificial meat, where the flavor of the meat is going to be absorbed into the pots, and therefore those pots need to be dealt with. So here's how we deal with them. So they need to be washed. We'll talk about in the next Mishnah. And all types of sacrificial meat, meaning not only kadshe kadshim, meaning the highest level, but also kadshim kalim, even the lower level sacrificial meat. All of those things need to be washed, or maybe only for kadshe kadshim, but not for kadshe kalim, meaning maybe only for the higher level, but not for the lower level. So now the Gemara explains that the verse teaches that even if it wasn't cooked in the pot, if it was placed in it hot, it still needs to be washed. Now the Gemara talks about airspace, because we love talking about airspace. If you remember what the ovens in the old days, in the times of the Mishnah and the Gemara looked like, you would actually cook like suspending some food in the airspace of the oven. And now let's say right, and it doesn't touch the walls. We're going to see in a minute what does touch the wall. But for meat, let's say you hung the pot in the middle and it doesn't touch the wall. Do the walls absorb the flavor, and therefore, because the oven was clay, was earthenware, do you have to break the oven? So the Gemara says, well, actually, the oven in the Beit HaMikdash was made out of metal because of this reason. They were concerned because it might absorb, and metal does not absorb like clay, and therefore, it was out of metal, or no, it was made out of metal because when they baked the menachot, which were bread, even though they were chametz, they were matzah, but they were placed actually on the wall, and they had oil in them, so for sure there was going to be absorption, and therefore it was metal, so it doesn't prove about airspace, because there we're talking about actually touching. Okay, since we're talking about the walls of an oven, if there was animal fat that was like smeared on the oven wall, you cannot eat the bread that was made in that oven, because the bread is now meat, like bisari, and we're scared that you're going to take it and eat it with your kutach. If you remember, kutach is a condiment that they used in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, which was dairy. It was made out of actually like curdled milk. So they said, you can't eat this meat bread, right? Meaty bread, because we're scared you're going to eat it with the dairy. And it seems that it's not given the option that, just light the oven for a certain amount of time, and the fat will burn off. It doesn't say this. It says that the bread is actually, you can't make bread in this oven. Another statement says that you can't make bread with milk because you might eat it with meat, right? Again, you make a really nice hamburger bun, and then but you put in milk, and now you think, oh, this would be great for my steak. No, right? You cannot do this. However, if you refire the oven, then it gets, so this Breita says, if you refire the oven, it gets rid of the fat in the walls. So here is different than what we just said before. So the Gemara says, again, there's a difference between pots and ovens, right? Meaning an oven is different because it has the fire on the inside and it absorbs things on the inside, whereas a pot has the fire on the outside and it absorbs in the inside. Therefore, you would have to kosher it from the inside the pot, and as you know, you can't kosher the inside of the pot. So right, therefore, for an earthenware pot, you need to break it, because you cannot like light a fire on the inside. Okay, Daf 96. So the Gemara asks, why can't we put these earthenware vessels into that are part of the temple into a kiln, right? It burns it really hot on the inside and the outside, and you remake it, and therefore you don't have to break it, right? Why are we wasting all of this? So we say that you can't have kilns in Jerusalem, right? It makes too much smoke, and therefore, as you know, right, kilns get very hot. Apparently, there's a lot of smoke, and therefore, it's not nice to have it in the temple. But the Gemara says, wait a minute, breaking all of these vessels, it also makes a lot of garbage, right? Speaking about, the environment, it makes a lot of garbage. The Gemara says, no, there was a miracle. All the broken pottery was absorbed into the floor of the Beit HaMikdash, and therefore it didn't create any garbage, and therefore this is what we need to do. So then the Gemara says, why was the oven in the Mikdash metal? Again, it could have been earthenware and we could have koshered it. The Gemara says, no. It is a kli sharet, it is a sanctified vessel, and therefore it needs to be metal, because it looks nicer, right? Again, everything in the Beit HaMikdash needs to look presentable and wealthy, and therefore it was made out of metal. Okay, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yehuda left his learning with Rami Bar Chama to go and learn with Rav Sheshet, right? We know in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, it was very important for everybody to have a student and a teacher, and generally students stayed with their teacher, but sometimes they move. When they move, sometimes the original teacher gets a little bit upset. So, and I don't know if you know, but Rami Bar Chama has a reputation of saying what he feels. So when Rami Bar Chama bumps into him afterwards, he said, like, why did you leave me? Right? Do you think that, Rav Sheshet is so much better that if you go there, you're going to be so much better because of association, right? You think that's going to make you great? So Rabbi Yitzchak said to Rami Bar Chama, no, he said, you answer questions with logic, but Rav Sheshet answers them with a source, with a Mishnah or a Breita. And therefore, he felt that is a stronger way to teach or to learn, and therefore he wanted to learn with him. So Rami Bar Chama said, okay, ask me any question and I'll answer with a Mishnah or a Breita. So he asked him, if I cook in part of a vessel, do I need to wash the whole thing out or just a little bit? So Rami Bar Chama answers, you only need to partially wash it because it's similar to the when the blood sprinkles. Right? If blood gets on the clothing, you only need to wash part of the clothing, right? And he quoted our Mishnah. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, no, there's a difference. Blood is different than cooking, right? Blood stays where it lands, but flavor, right? It spreads over the whole pot. And there's actually a braita that says that there's a stringency with blood, and therefore it's different, and therefore, right, it's different, and there's a stringency to washing vessels, that you need to wash the whole pot as opposed to the garment that you only need to wash a little bit. So Rami Bar Chama says, I stand corrected, and if you have a braita to teach, to teach about the whole pot, then amazing. So it seems that, and that's the end of the interaction. So it's an interesting end to the story. Okay, we said that all sanctified meats need to be, or sacrificial meats need to be washed from the pots, or maybe only the higher level of the sacrificial meat, right? Maybe we exclude truma that doesn't need cleansing, but there's a braita that says that you do need to clean the pot if you cooked truma in it. So it says, no, wait, that braita teaches that you only are required, it only requires the washing for the place that you cooked in that pot, right? The partial, what we were talking about before, but not the whole pot. Or maybe it's talking about what you can use to wash the pot. You can use wine or diluted wine, or maybe it's that you can even be done with hot water, but the kachim, the sacrificial meat, needs cold water. Or maybe it's talking about that truma doesn't need an extra washing with cold water, but sacrificial meat does. Okay, next Mishnah is going to talk about, again, pots that are used to cook the sacrificial meat. Now, it's important to recognize that if you remember, we spoke about each sacrifice needs to be eaten by a certain amount of time, a day and a night, 2 days and a night, right? And if it's left over beyond that time period, it's called notar, and it is forbidden to eat from that meat. And therefore, if the pot wasn't washed out by the end of that time, then the flavor in the pot is notar, right? So we have to be careful with the pots that are used and make sure that we wash them in the certain amount of time. So the Mishnah tells us at the bottom of 96, a pot used at the beginning of the festival, meaning Pesach or Sukkot, right? The regel can be used all of Chag, meaning you do not have to wash it at the end of the day or after 2 days. You can keep using it for all 7 days, or you can only use it for the amount of time for that specific sacrifice. Okay, how do we clean these pots? It's a two-step process. One is called mirika. Mirika is what's called purging from the inside, and shtifa, which is washing from the outside. And these are done with cold water. Okay. And a spit or a grill that you, let's say, grilled the meat on needs hagala with hot water, right? So you have to you have to dip it into hot water or pour hot water over it. Okay, the Gemara on Daf 97 tells us, the verse for when it's talking about Pesach says, go home in the morning. So the question is, what morning is it talking about? It can't be talking about the morning of Pesach because it's still a festival. So it must be the end of the festival. And therefore, we see that the whole festival is considered one long day, even though we know that it isn't, but it has the law of as if one day. Therefore, you only need to wash the pot at the end of the festival. Now, so then the Gemara says, wait a minute, there's no notar. Again, remember we talked about how each sacrifice has a certain amount of time. It's definitely not 7 days, right? The longest is 2 days. So how could we say you don't have to wash it for 7 days? So the Gemara says, each day when you heat up the pot, you're cleaning out the pot from the day before. Therefore, there's no need to wash it afterwards, meaning just by heating up the pot, you are cleansing it from, I guess, the inside and the outside. You can wait till the time that the sacrifice can be eaten, and then it needs to be washed. Again, the washing is connected to the amount of time that you eat. Washing with cold, again, we said washing is with cold water. And maybe or right, and maybe mirika is with hot water again, or again, mirika is hot water on the inside, shtifa is cold water on the outside, and this is learned from the koshering of the pots in the desert. When we won the war with the Midianites, we took their vessels, and the Torah talks about how they koshered those vessels, and that's where we learn all of our koshering laws, right? So again, you need boiling water, and then maybe here we're talking about, no, we're talking about these pots after the boiling water of Hagala, then you wash them with an extra step of cold water. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 97. Excuse me 1 second. Okay, sorry about that, choked. Okay. The next Mishnah tells us, let's say, you cooked in a pot 2 types of meat, one regular meat and one padshim, meaning sacrificial meat, or different levels of sacrificial meat. The higher level, kadshe kachim, with kadshe kalim. If it's enough to impart the flavor, so then the lenient one needs to be eaten. So sorry. Then the lenient one has to be eaten in the amount of time as the stringent one, meaning we're going to take the most stringent thing. If it was enough that gives a flavor, then we're going to see the whole mixture as the more stringent one. And again, all right. If, let's say, invalid food touched sacrificial food, so then only the place where it touched becomes invalid, and then you cut that off, and then the rest is okay. So now the Gemara explains. If the more stringent meat is big enough to impart flavor, then the lenient thing is eaten like the stringent one, and you need to wash that pot. But if not, then you do not need to wash that pot. According to Rava, that's so. Okay, so now even according to Rava, who says that you don't need washing for the lenient thing, but if it's together with the stringent thing, then you need to wash it. Now, we had two cases, one with regular meat and sacrificial meat, one with kodshe kachim and kodshe kalim. So the Gemara tells us we need both of those cases. Because you might have thought that there would be a different law in each one of those instances. Okay. Okay. Then we talked about, um, let's say that, let's say a sin offering, a chatat, touched a shlamim, then it needs to be eaten like the chatat, which is more stringent. It's a shorter amount of time. And we don't say that, oh, why don't we let the meaning you're going to end up, let's say you don't finish the meat, you're going to end up wasting that meat because you're saying that it has to be eaten quicker. The Gemara says that is true because we're always going to be more stringent in these cases. Okay. Next, okay. Hold on a second. A verse links all of the korbanot to teach. So there's a verse that links all the korbanot. Each word teaches something else. So it says olah, the burnt offering. Everything, all the sacrifices are like the olah, that the blood needs to be collected in a vessel, or maybe it's teaching that all the sacrifices need to be slaughtered with a knife, or maybe we learn that from Akedat Yitzchak, from the binding of Isaac, where the olah, right, the ram was slaughtered with a knife. Therefore, all sacrifices, again, animal sacrifices, not bird sacrifices, need to be slaughtered with a knife. It says the word mincha, the grain offering, that teaches that the sacrifices are eaten by male Kohanim. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. Daf 98, sin offering, the Chatat, teaches us that it sanctifies things with absorption. Remember, we said if two pieces of meat touch each other and they absorb the flavor, so then the sanctity is absorbed as well. Asham, the guilt offering, teaches that if you find a fetus in the sanctified or sacrificial animal, the fetus itself is not sanctified. It's very interesting. How do we learn that from the Asham? The Asham is male, so there is no fetus in the Asham, and therefore, even when you have a female animal, if you find a fetus in the sacrifice, in the animal, it is not sanctified and it's not seen as part of the sacrifice. Okay. The miluim teaches us that the leftovers are burnt, and no live animals are seen as leftovers. Shlamim, right? The peace offering teaches that it can become pigul. Remember, we spent a lot of time on pigul, right? Again, improper intent. To eat a sacrifice, either in the wrong place or in the wrong time. And it can also make other things pigul, right? The libations as well. Okay, mincha, just like it absorbed sanctity from other menachot, so too all korbanot, or maybe just because menachot are very soft, and we said it has oil, that maybe that's with absorption. And then we said, no, remember, Chatat also taught about absorption, which is meat, and therefore they both teach this idea. And then another opinion is that Chatat comes to teach that it has to come from sacrificial animals, have to come from chulin, from mundane animals, and the sacrifice must be done during the day and with your right hand. Okay, and Asham, again, we mentioned this already, but this is another opinion. Maybe Asham teaches that the bones of a sacrifice are mutar, are permissible to be used if it's not a burnt offering, but otherwise you can use the bones. If the blood of the chatat fell on the clothing and then an olah blood fell on top of it, meaning two sacrifices, right, splashed at the same time in the same place, but first was the chatat and then the olah, you need to wash it because the chatat was the one that was absorbed first. What about if it was the opposite? Maybe you need to wash it because the second one was the chatat, or maybe you don't because it wasn't absorbed, it's just like on top of it. And with that, we finish the 11th chapter. Okay. The next Mishnah, the next parak, is going to talk about the sacrificial meat that is given out to all of the Kohanim. And we're going to learn who gets a portion and who can eat from this meat. So the Mishnah tells us that a Tvul Yom, meaning a Kohen who became impure and went to the mikvah, but he still needs to wait till the nighttime to be completely purified. And the Mechusar Kippurim, who is a Kohen who became impure, but depending on the type of impurity, he now has to wait to bring a sacrifice on his 8th day. Both of them at this moment are still impure, therefore they do not get the meat that needs to be eaten that night. Again, something that's very interesting that I think is important to mention, we know in Judaism, the day starts at night and goes till the following day, till sunset. However, in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, the day is seen from the morning through the night to the following day, meaning sacrifices that are sacrificed during the day, their meat is eaten that night. It's seen as the same day as it was sacrificed. So that's just an important difference that many people are not aware of. And therefore, we're going to say that any Kohen that cannot eat the sacrifice today cannot eat the sacrifice tonight, even though between you and me, it is still seen as a different day, and the Kohen is not impure anymore at night. So that's interesting, and we're going to talk about the different ramifications. Okay, so Tzbul Yom and Mechusar Kippurim, they are at the moment impure. They technically are pure at night, but they cannot eat from the sacrifice that night. And Onen is a person whose immediate relative died, and the person is called an Onen before. Well, we'll discuss, but let's say on the day of death or the day of burial, he's called an onen, or she, but here we're talking about men. They're called, so the onen can touch the korbanot, but cannot do any work because they're busy generally preparing for burial, for the funeral, or they cannot get, so they can't do the work in the Beit HaMikdash, and they do not get meat for that night. They cannot get the meat from that day. Kohanim with blemishes can get meat, but they cannot do the service, but they can get the meat and eat it. Okay, now if you can't do so then the Gemara ends by, if you can't do the avodah, if you can't do the service, you don't get meat, or the hides of the animal, which is another thing that they gave out in the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, Daf 99, the Gemara explains. We learn from the verse that a Kohen who does the work, the service in the Beit HaMikdash, eats from that sacrifice, but it's not necessarily each Kohen eats from the sacrifice that they did the service. It means anybody on duty who could have brought the sacrifice can eat from the meat. And this even includes a minor, even though a minor doesn't do the work, but the minor can eat from the meat, but he cannot get a selek. He doesn't get a portion in the division. The person with a blemish is involved, does get a portion of the meat. The Torah allowed him because it says that every male gets to eat. However, it excludes the Tvul Yom, who is impure. Okay, what if the person with a blemish, the Baal Mum, is impure? So meaning maybe he can get the meat anyway because he can eat it at night. Or because he can't eat it now, he doesn't get the meat. And that's the question, and it is a machloket. A Kohen Gadol, a high priest, who is an onen, again, someone died, now, he does not become an onen, but the Gemara says he doesn't eat from the sacrifice and he does not get a portion. A regular Kohen who is impure can do the avodah. Remember, we talked about sometimes the avodah can be done by Kohanim who are impure, but he can't eat it. Therefore, he doesn't get a portion. The onen, a regular Kohen who is an onen, can't touch the sacrifice till they go to the mikvah. But if they go to the mikvah, they can touch the sacrifice as long as they're very mindful that they're not touching the dead body. Okay. If you, hold on 1 second. Okay, so now we said that the onen isn't part of the division, but can eat that night. So we say that he can go to the mikvah and eat his Pesach that night, right? This is where we really discuss the Tvul Yom, because we know that there's a mitzvah for every person to eat from the Korban Pesach. Now, at night, he's going to be able to eat it because he will be pure. So can the Tvul Yom send his Pesach during the day, and then he can eat it at night? The onen. Not the Tvul Yom, the onen. Can he eat the Pesach at night? The Gemara says yes, because at night he will be able to eat the meat. He can send his Pesach that night, but he cannot eat the other sacrifices, the Chagiga, the other sacrifices he cannot eat, but he can eat the Pesach. Or no, on Pesach, because he's allowed to eat the Pesach, he can eat from all of the sacrifices. Or maybe it depends. And here it gets a little complicated. As we know, the burial isn't always on the day that the person dies. So we're going to construct a number of cases. If the person buried the deceased on the 14th of Nisan, which is the day that we bring the Korban Pesach, and he died on that same day, so then he can only eat the Korban Pesach because really he's still an onen that night and he cannot eat other sacrifices. But if the person actually died the day before on the 13th and you buried him on the 14th, so then being an onen that night is only rabbinic, it's only dirabbanan, and therefore you can eat all of the sacrifices. Okay. Uh, okay. Hold on a minute. Okay, so then there's a braita that talks about the onen and how he's not allowed to send any sacrifices. However, he can send his pesach. Okay, so again, as we said on daf, now on daf 100, it depends if we're talking about the night, again, the night versus the day, and if it's the 13th or on the 14th. Or that's one opinion. Or the Gemara discusses maybe it's the differentiation is if a person died before midday on the 14th, then they do not bring a Pesach. But if he died after after midday chatzot on the 14th, then you can eat the Pesach. The idea was after chatzot, the person was already obligated to bring the Pesach, and then they became an onen. So the aninut, the morningness, doesn't cancel the Pesachness. So he still brings the Pesach and he can eat it at night. Then the Gemara discusses that no, maybe both of them are discussing after chatzot, after midday, but one is maybe before they slaughtered the animal, meaning they didn't slaughter it yet, versus after they slaughtered it, and therefore only if they slaughtered it already can you eat the Korban Pesach, but if they didn't, so then they didn't. Okay. Next topic, concept related to this is there are 3 days that make a person a mourner. There is obviously the day of death, but other than that, there's the burial, Yom Kvura. There is Yom Shmu'ah, when you hear that the person died, and this is up to 30 days of the death. And then there's the 3rd day, which is called Yom Likut Atzamot, the day that they gather the bones. So I don't know if you know this, but in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, the way burial worked was you buried a person when they died, and then after a year, when the body decomposes and there's only the bones, they would collect the bones and put them in an ossuary, like in like a box, or they would put them with their ancestors. That's why we have this idea of they were buried with their ancestors, or they were gathered to their ancestors. That is this. So on that day, the person is also has some laws of mourning. So the Gemara tells us that the day you hear about the death is like the burial day for you have to keep 7 and 30 days of mourning, but for Pesach, it's like the day of the gathering of the bones, and you can eat the Pesach. The burial day and the gathering of the bones day, a person goes to the mikvah, and then they can eat sacrifices that night. So say that both the burial day you can't eat sacrifice, close to sunset, or you gathered the bones close to sunset, or you buried the person close to sunset. So then you can eat the sacrifices that night, meaning it was before sunset. But after, you cannot eat the sacrifices that night. Then the Gemara asks, is anin for the whole day or only till burial? So if the funeral is at 11 o'clock in the morning, then after the funeral, is the person still an onin? And the Gemara, no, we say that every day till burial, including the night after the burial, is still seen as the person is an onen, or no, only till the burial, but not the night after the burial. And there's a machloket if aninut, if this state at night is biblical or rabbinic. Okay, last stop for today, 101. We learn about this concept of being an onen from Aaron and his two sons after his other two sons died or were killed. So let's just review a little bit of the story. The Kohanim are practicing to work in the temple, in the Mishkan, and they are practicing for 7 days. It's called the 7 Yemei HaMiluim. On the 8th day, we have Chanukat HaMishkan, the inauguration of the Mishkan. Moshe acts as the high priest for all these 8 days till he anoints Aharon to become the high priest. On the 8th day, they bring 3 sacrifices. We'll actually see that they bring more, but they bring mincha, a grain offering, shlamim, and a chatat. The mincha and the shlamim are special sacrifices that were connected to the inauguration, and they brought a chatat, a sin offering, which is because that it was Rosh Chodesh. It was the first day of Nisan. Okay, that's the background. So now, Moshe tells Aaron and his sons to eat from the sacrifices, even though they were onanim. Again, Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's of not while doing part of the temple service or deviating from part of the temple service, and all of them. Aaron and the other two sons are now mourners, are now onen. So they then discover that the chatat was burned, and Moshe gets angry at Aaron and his sons for not eating from the sacrifice. Aaron explains he can't eat from it, and Moshe accepts his answer. Now, Moshe uses the word God commanded 3 times in this discussion. So we see that, Moshe keeps saying, well, God told you have to eat from the sacrifice. And Aaron says, well, I'm not eating from that sacrifice. So we say that the chatat, the sin offering, was totally burnt, maybe because they were onenim, and therefore they couldn't eat it, so they burnt it, or maybe it was burnt because it like accidentally became impure. So the Gemara basically explains that, like, it goes through the whole conversation of what they said, talks about the fact that there were actually 3 sin offerings that day. One is Nachshon's sin offering. One is the sin offering of the nation because it was the inauguration. And one was the sin offering because it was Rosh Chodesh. So only the Rosh Chodesh one was burnt. The other 2, because they were special for that day, they could be eaten in a state of aninut because it was a special sacrifice of that day. But the Rosh Chodesh, which is a regular sacrifice, was not allowed to be eaten in a state of aninut. And I guess as a aside, the Gemara says, well, wait a minute, what about Pinchas? Pinchas is the only other Kohen who's not an immediate relative of the sons that died, of Aaron and his sons, right? Pinchas is a cousin. So there's a machloket in the Gemara when Pinchas becomes an acting Kohen. Again, this is the very beginning of the Kohanim being able to do temple service. So either Pinchas became inaugurated as well with Aaron and his sons, or only after he kills Zimri, if you remember the story of Cosby and Zimri. So then there's a very clear blessing that he gets from Hashem, saying that he is now a Kohen. So either it's just like a bonus blessing, or that is actually when he becomes a Kohen. And therefore, the Gemara has a machloket if Pinchas is part of this conversation or not. Lastly, the Gemara says, wait a minute, there's also Moshe, right? Moshe was acting as a Kohen, even though in general he's not a Kohen, but in those days he was a Kohen, and he's not directly, again, he's the uncle, but it does not make him an onen. Why couldn't he eat from the sacrifice? And the Gemara says Moshe was very busy on these days. He was actually speaking to God every oh, thank you very much for that. Sorry. I was saying, Moshe is busy talking to God. He actually, if you remember, at this moment, they're still by Har Sinai, and therefore Moshe is still going up to Har Sinai to talk to God every morning and every night. Therefore, he's not available to eat from the meat, and therefore the conversation was really between Aharon and his sons. Thank you for correcting me about Pinchas. Okay, with that, we finish today's class. Be'ezrat Hashem, we will reconvene next week. I hope everyone had a wonderful Chanukah, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we should continue learning. We have, I see a few minutes if anybody has any questions. Yes.
I heard you say something I've never heard before. You said Moshe went up Sinai every morning and every night?
Yeah, he had a lot to learn from God.
Well, yeah,
Yeah. So he was still in close connection with God. Even that's what the Gemara says on the bottom of 101. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not in the Torah. Let's put it that way.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe that's why they never.
Yes, it's just in the Gemara. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? There was a lot.
Yes, I can just say that I got amused with the laundry, all of the 7 steps that one would do, and all of the discussion about how would it be possible to do it inside when you can't take the offended item inside. And so they determine how large it would need to be under that size to be able to go in. So I see them, in my mind, try to see them down on their knees or something, like pushing through this tiny little bit and scrubbing this little spot with the 7 different steps. I don't know. Have you ever heard anybody figure out how that was done?
No.
So just to do a little bit, you could get a little bit in there, whatever. So, I mean, I guess just if you're spot cleaning, but if the whole thing was covered and ruined, that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
You'd have to throw it
Yeah.
away and burn it.
Again,
Yeah.
we're talking about two different things, and we'll talk about it more. But I mean, actually, we finished the topic, but we see it again. The idea isn't about the ruining of the clothing. It's about having the sacrificial blood on, like removing the blood, because the blood is part of the korban, and that needs to be removed. So we're talking about it from the side of the blood, not from the side of the kohen who is getting dirty, because that we'll also discuss, like when they, wore something different or had to get new clothing. So they're obviously related, but here we're talking about having to remove the blood, because that needs to not be walking around, because it's part of the sacrifice. That's the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. So have a great week and Shabbat Shalom, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ebonit.
Besimcha.
Thank you.
Thank you.